Do you ever wonder what grocery shopping was really like before scanners, barcodes, and self-checkout lanes changed everything? In the 1970s, a trip to the store was built on trust, routine, and a simplicity the modern world has quietly left behind. So what did we lose when convenience replaced connection? Checkout lines with no scanners or barcodes were the heartbeat of every grocery store in the 1970s, and if you never stood in one, you missed an experience that moved at its own stubborn pace. Cashiers sat behind heavy metal registers, punching in prices by hand with fingers that never seemed to stop moving. Every item had a price sticker or a stamped tag, and the cashier read each one, keyed it in, and moved to the next without missing a beat. The rhythm of those buttons clicking filled the air like a strange kind of grocery store music. Lines stretched down the aisle, but nobody complained the way people do now because waiting was simply part of the ritual. Kids leaned on the conveyor belt watching cans and boxes slide forward while their parents chatted with the person behind them. There was no beep, no laser, no screen flashing totals. Just a person, a register, and the quiet trust that every price would be entered correctly. Today, a single scanning error sends shoppers into frustration. But back then, the whole system ran on human memory and patience, and it carried a warmth no machine has ever replicated. Pushing metal shopping carts with no child safety seats was just part of the weekly grocery run in the 1970s, and nobody gave it a second thought. Kids climbed in, stood up, leaned over the sides, or sat cross-legged among the canned goods like tiny passengers on a rolling ship. Parents steered with one hand and grabbed items with the other, trusting that the weight of the groceries would keep everything balanced. The carts were bare metal, cold in winter and hot if left sitting in a summer parking lot. There were no plastic flaps, no leg holes, no buckles, and certainly no padded inserts designed to keep a toddler locked in place. Kids treated the cart like a ride, gripping the edges and laughing as parents rounded corners or picked up speed down an empty aisle. If a child stood too high or leaned too far, the solution was a firm word, not a safety feature. Today, carts carry warning labels, built-in seats, and harness straps because the injuries from those old metal rides were more common than anyone admitted at the time. But for the children who lived it, the grocery cart was a chariot, and every trip felt like a small adventure on wheels. Buying meat wrapped only in butcher paper was one of those rituals that made grocery shopping in the 1970s feel deeply personal and surprisingly intimate. You walked up to the glass case, pointed to the cut you wanted, and watched as the butcher pulled it out with bare hands, slapped it onto the scale, and wrapped it tightly in thick white paper before scribbling the weight and price with a grease pencil. There were no vacuum-sealed trays, no plastic film, and no styrofoam bases. The paper absorbed the juices, and by the time you got home, the bottom of the bag often carried a faint pink stain nobody thought twice about. Families trusted the butcher the way they trusted their doctor because the man behind the counter knew your name, your preferences, and exactly how thick you liked your pork chops. Kids pressed their faces against the cold glass, staring at the rows of cuts lined up like treasures on display. The smell of fresh meat, cold steel, and sawdust filled that section of the store in a way modern aisles cannot replicate. Today, everything is sealed, labeled, and traced to a plant. But back then, the butcher's word was all the food safety you ever needed. S&H Green Stamps at every register were one of the most exciting parts of grocery shopping in the 1970s, turning an ordinary trip into something that felt like earning tiny rewards for simply buying what your family needed. Cashiers handed over sheets of small green stamps with every purchase, and the number you received depended on how much you spent. Kids loved licking the back of each stamp and pressing them into collection books with pages that filled up slowly over weeks and months. Families kept those books in kitchen drawers or tucked beside the telephone, adding stamps after every trip with the patience of people building something meaningful one square at a time. Once a book was full, you took it to a redemption center and traded it for household items like toasters, lamps, blankets, or luggage. It felt like free money, even though every stamp was earned through spending. The excitement of flipping through the catalog and choosing a reward made the system feel generous and personal. Today, loyalty programs live inside apps and plastic cards. but nothing has matched the tactile satisfaction of peeling, licking, and pressing those green stamps into place. Glass milk bottles sold and returned at the store were part of a weekly cycle so familiar in the 1970s that most families never stopped to think about how elegant the system really was. You bought your milk in thick, heavy glass bottles that clinked together in the bag and felt cool and solid in your hands. Once the milk was gone, you rinsed the bottle, set it by the door, and the dairy company collected it, sterilized it, and filled it again. The cycle repeated endlessly, producing almost no waste and creating a connection between the family and the local dairy that felt personal and dependable. Kids loved the weight of those bottles, the cream that floated visibly at the top before you shook it, and the satisfying pop of the cardboard cap when you pressed your thumb through it. Families often had a small rack near the door where empties waited for pickup, and the milkman sometimes arrived before dawn, swapping fresh bottles for used ones without ringing the bell. Today, plastic jugs dominate every dairy aisle, and returning a container feels foreign. But that glass bottle system worked beautifully, quietly, and with a simplicity modern recycling programs still struggle to match. Cigarette aisles right next to the cereal were one of those arrangements in 1970s grocery stores that nobody questioned. Tobacco products sat openly on shelves, sometimes at eye level for children, displayed in bright packaging that competed for attention alongside breakfast foods. Parents walked past without concern, picking up a carton alongside bread and eggs as if cigarettes were just another household supply. Kids stared at the colorful logos and bold lettering, absorbing imagery that was never meant to be subtle. There were no locked cases, no age verification signs, and no barriers between the candy rack and the cigarette display. It was simply how stores were organized, a reflection of a time when smoking was woven so deeply into daily life that it shared shelf space with everything else. Some stores placed promotional displays near the checkout, offering discounts on tobacco beside the gum and magazines. The casualness feels unbelievable now, in a world where cigarettes hide behind counters and carry warning labels. But in the 1970s, tobacco and groceries lived side by side, and no one saw anything unusual about it. No expiration dates on most packaged foods meant that families in the 1970s relied entirely on their senses to decide whether something was still safe to eat. You opened a can of soup, sniffed it, and if it smelled fine, dinner was served. Boxes of crackers, bags of flour, jars of peanut butter, and cans of fruit sat in pantries for months, sometimes years, without a printed date telling you when the food had crossed a line. People trusted their instincts because there was nothing else to trust. If bread felt stale, you toasted it. If cheese turned a shade you did not recognize, you cut off the edge and kept the rest. Families managed their kitchens with a quiet confidence that came from generations of doing exactly the same thing. Nobody panicked over a missing label because labels simply did not carry that information yet. The idea of tossing perfectly good food because a printed date said so would have seemed wasteful and absurd. Today, expiration dates govern almost every purchase, and shelves are cleared based on stamps that sometimes reflect quality rather than safety. Back then, your nose, your eyes, and your common sense were the only tools you needed. Bulk bins with no sneeze guards or gloves were one of those features in 1970s grocery stores that made shopping feel communal, casual, and unregulated. Wooden barrels and open metal bins sat along aisles, overflowing with loose candy, dried beans, rice, nuts, and baked goods that customers scooped out with shared metal scoops or grabbed with bare hands. Nobody wore gloves, and nobody worried about who touched what before them. The system was built on unspoken trust that everyone's hands were clean enough and intentions good enough. Kids plunged their arms into bins of penny candy, picking out pieces one by one, while parents weighed bags of trail mix or scooped flour into paper sacks. The smell of roasted peanuts, dried fruit, and raw grains mixed in a way that made the whole aisle feel alive. Store owners kept the bins full and the scoops clean, and that was considered more than enough. Today, health codes require sealed containers, sneeze guards, tongs, and gloves for anything sold in bulk, and the open barrel system that once made grocery shopping feel neighborly has given way to rules designed to protect what trust alone could not. Personal tabs and handshake credit at local markets were part of a system that ran entirely on trust, reputation, and the quiet understanding that neighbors would always settle their debts. In the 1970s, small grocery stores and corner markets kept handwritten ledgers behind the counter, recording what each family owed and trusting them to come back and pay when the next paycheck arrived. There were no credit card machines, no interest rates, and no fine print. The store owner knew your name, knew your family, and understood that letting you take groceries home on credit was an investment in a relationship built over years. Families short on cash at the end of the month simply told the clerk to put it on the tab, and nobody felt ashamed because it was how the community operated. Kids watched their parents exchange nothing more than a nod or a handshake before walking out with a full bag. The whole system depended on something modern business has mostly abandoned: the belief that people will do the right thing without being forced. Today, every transaction is tracked, verified, and secured, and the personal tab has vanished along with the trust that made it possible. Sending kids alone to the store with a handwritten list was one of those ordinary acts of trust that defined childhood in the 1970s. Parents scribbled a few items on a scrap of paper, handed over a folded bill or a handful of coins, and sent children out the door with nothing but directions and confidence. Kids as young as 7 walked or biked to the nearest grocery store, clutching the list like a mission briefing, scanning aisles with serious faces as they matched handwriting to items on the shelf. Clerks recognized them, helped them find what they needed, and sometimes carried the bag to the door. There was no fear of strangers, no concern about traffic, and no worry about a child being gone for 30 minutes. It was a rite of passage, a small step toward independence every child was expected to take. Parents believed errands built responsibility, and the neighborhood acted as a safety net that made the whole thing feel natural. Today, sending a young child to a store alone would raise immediate concerns about supervision and liability. But back then, a kid with a grocery list and a few dollars was part of the landscape, trusted and unquestioned. Cashiers who made change entirely from memory were one of the quiet marvels of grocery shopping in the 1970s, the kind of skill people relied on without ever stopping to admire. There were no digital displays, no automatic coin dispensers, and no screens telling the cashier how much to hand back. The total was punched in, the customer handed over a bill, and the cashier calculated the difference in their head before pulling coins and bills from the drawer with practiced fingers. It happened so fast that most shoppers never questioned the accuracy. These cashiers handled dozens of transactions an hour, juggling prices, coupons, and odd change without breaking rhythm. Kids watched in fascination as coins clicked into open palms and bills were counted back with a flick of the wrist. It was a performance nobody called a performance because it was simply part of the job. Mistakes were rare, and when they happened, a quick recount settled the matter without tension. Today, registers calculate everything automatically, and many cashiers never touch the math at all. The skill that once defined the job has quietly disappeared, replaced by technology that is faster but far less human. Paper bags only and no plastic in sight was the simple reality of grocery shopping in the 1970s, and nobody thought of it as a choice because there was nothing else to choose. Every checkout ended with the bagger pulling open a brown paper sack, snapping it into shape, and loading items with a rhythm that made the whole process look effortless. Heavy cans went to the bottom, bread and eggs sat on top, and if the load was too much, the bagger doubled the bag without being asked. Families carried groceries to the car in arms full of rustling brown paper, sometimes gripping the bottom with one hand when the weight threatened to break through. Kids loved the bags almost as much as the food inside, folding them into hats, masks, or book covers the moment groceries were unpacked. These bags were reused for everything from trash liners to school book protection. Nobody talked about being eco-friendly because the concept barely existed yet. It was simply how things worked. Today, the paper versus plastic debate has become an environmental conversation that would have baffled shoppers who never imagined a world where the bag itself became the problem. produce sold loose with no PLU stickers or packaging was the standard in 1970s grocery stores, where fruits and vegetables arrived in crates and were piled on open displays without a label in sight. You picked up an apple, turned it in your hand, sniffed it if you wanted, and placed it in a thin paper bag torn from a roll above the bin. Nobody scanned anything because there was nothing to scan. Cashiers knew the price of every item by memory or glanced at a chart beside the register. Tomatoes were sold by the pound, corn by the ear, and watermelons by the thump test and nothing else. There were no country of origin labels, no organic certifications, and no wax coatings for shelf appeal. What you saw was what you got, and what you got was whatever local farms or distributors delivered that week. Kids grabbed grapes from the pile and ate them before reaching the register, and parents barely noticed because the produce section ran on a kind of honor system. Today, every piece of fruit carries a tiny sticker with a code that tells the register what it costs and where it came from. The simplicity of the old way feels almost impossible now. Store butchers who let you taste before you bought were one of the warmest, most personal parts of grocery shopping in the 1970s. You walked up to the deli counter, and before you finished asking about the salami or roast beef, the butcher had already sliced a thin piece and placed it on wax paper for you to try. Kids stood on tiptoe hoping for a sample, and more often than not, the butcher would wink and hand one down without being asked. It was not a marketing strategy or promotional event. It was how business was done between people who recognized each other week after week. The butcher knew your tastes, remembered your last order, and adjusted every slice based on nothing more than a familiar nod. That small gesture of generosity turned a transaction into a relationship, a moment of trust exchanged across a glass counter. Families returned to the same store not because of prices, but because the butcher treated them like neighbors. Today, samples are pre-packaged, placed behind sneeze guards, and governed by health codes that leave no room for a spontaneous slice offered with a smile. The counter is still there, but the connection behind it has faded into something far more distant. Frozen food aisles with open-top freezer cases were a familiar feature of every grocery store in the 1970s, where chest-style bins sat in long rows without a glass door or lid to separate customers from the cold. You reached into the frost, rummaged through stacked boxes of fish sticks, pot pies, and frozen vegetables, and pulled out whatever caught your eye. The cold air rose against your arms, and in summer, kids leaned over the edge just to feel the chill on a hot afternoon. Nobody worried about temperature loss, energy waste, or how many hands had shuffled through the same pile of frozen dinners. The bins stayed cold enough, the food stayed frozen enough, and the system worked well enough that nobody demanded more. Employees restocked by tossing new boxes on top of old ones, and customers dug to the bottom when they wanted something buried beneath the pile. Today, freezer aisles are sealed behind glass doors with digital thermometers and automatic defrost cycles that keep everything precisely regulated. The open bins are gone, replaced by a system built on efficiency rather than the frosty browsing that made frozen food shopping feel like a small expedition. Refillable glass soda bottles from the store cooler were one of the simple pleasures of grocery shopping in the 1970s, the kind of detail that made even a quick errand feel special. You reached into a cold metal cooler near the entrance and pulled out a thick glass bottle beaded with condensation, heavy enough to feel substantial and cold enough to sting your palm. The caps required a bottle opener, and many stores had one bolted to the side of the cooler for convenience. Kids loved the satisfying hiss when the cap popped free and the way the soda tasted sharper, colder, and somehow better than anything from a can. Families bought them by the case, drank them at picnics and cookouts, and returned the empties for a deposit that added up over time. The bottles were collected, washed, and refilled by the bottling company in a cycle that produced almost no waste and kept the same glass circulating for years. Today, plastic bottles and aluminum cans dominate every cooler, and the refill system that once felt natural has all but disappeared. But anyone who remembers the weight of a glass soda bottle in their hand knows that something irreplaceable was lost when convenience took over. No nutrition labels on any food package meant that families in the 1970s had no idea how many calories or grams of fat hid inside the products they brought home every week. You picked up a box of cereal or a bag of chips, and the only information on the back was a list of ingredients printed in tiny letters most people never read. There were no daily value percentages, no serving size breakdowns, and no bold warnings about allergens. People chose food based on taste, brand loyalty, and whatever their mother had always bought before them. Nobody compared sodium content between 2 cans of soup because that information did not exist on labels. Doctors gave general advice about eating well, but the specifics were left to guesswork and tradition. Kids ate whatever tasted good, parents trusted whatever was familiar, and the idea that a package should tell you exactly what was inside had not yet become part of the culture. Today, nutrition labels are mandatory on nearly everything, and shoppers make decisions based on numbers that would have been invisible a generation earlier. The shift gave families real power over their choices, but it also revealed how blind the old system truly was. Handwritten price tags on every single item were one of the quiet details that made grocery stores in the 1970s feel more like small businesses than massive retail operations. Employees walked the aisles with grease pencils or pricing guns, stamping or writing the cost directly onto each can, box, and jar by hand. The numbers were sometimes crooked, sometimes smudged, and occasionally hard to read, but they were always there, sitting right on the product where customers could see them. Kids found it fascinating to watch the pricing crew work their way down an aisle, clicking the gun and stamping each item with quick, repetitive rhythm. If a price changed, someone walked back through the store and re-stickered every affected product, a job that could take hours. Cashiers relied on those tags for every transaction, reading each one before punching it into the register by hand. Today, barcodes and digital shelf labels have replaced the handwritten system entirely, turning pricing into an invisible process managed by computers. But there was something honest about seeing the price marked right on the product, a directness that modern shopping has quietly traded for speed and automation. Full-service gas pumps attached to grocery stores were a common sight in the 1970s, combining 2 errands into one stop in a way that felt efficient and personal. You pulled into the lot, and an attendant walked out before you turned off the engine, ready to pump gas, check oil, and clean windshields. Families loved the convenience because one parent could shop while the other stayed in the car. The attendant knew regulars by name, asked about the kids, and sometimes recommended a deal on motor oil just inside the entrance. Kids watched from the back seat as the attendant moved with calm, practiced confidence that made the whole process feel both efficient and neighborly. Nobody pumped their own gas because the service was included, expected, and deeply woven into the culture of roadside commerce. Today, most stations are self-serve, and the ones attached to grocery stores feel like afterthoughts rather than extensions of the shopping experience. The full-service attendant has nearly vanished, taking with him a personal connection that turned filling a tank into something warmer than a transaction. Bringing your own container for dairy and deli items was a quiet, practical habit in the 1970s that nobody treated as unusual or environmentally significant. Families carried glass jars, metal tins, and ceramic bowls to the store, handing them across the counter so the deli clerk could fill them with fresh cream, butter, cottage cheese, or sliced meats. The containers were weighed empty first, then filled and weighed again, and you paid only for the product inside. There was no packaging to throw away, no plastic wrap to peel off, and no label to read because the clerk told you everything you needed to know while handing back your jar. Kids loved watching thick cream pour slowly into the family jar, or seeing sliced ham layered carefully into a tin their mother carried in her shopping bag. It was a personal exchange that made the store feel like a kitchen shared between neighbors. The whole system ran on familiarity and routine, with clerks who remembered which container belonged to which family. Today, health codes and packaging regulations make this practice nearly impossible, and the idea of handing a personal container across a counter feels like a relic from another era. Open-air bakery counters with no protective covers were one of the most inviting corners of any grocery store in the 1970s, where bread, rolls, pastries, and donuts sat on open shelves without a sheet of glass between them and customers. The smell alone pulled people toward the display, a blend of yeast, sugar, and butter drifting through the store like a silent invitation. Shoppers picked up items with bare hands, squeezed bread to check freshness, and sometimes put things back without a thought. Kids reached for cookies from the lowest shelf, fingers brushing other items along the way. Nobody wore gloves, nobody used tongs, and nobody worried about who touched the bread before them. Bakers restocked throughout the day, placing items onto surfaces wiped with a damp cloth. It was a system built on good faith and the belief that everyone was careful enough. Today, bakery items sit behind glass or inside sealed packaging, protected by health codes requiring barriers between food and the public. The open counter that once felt like a warm kitchen has been replaced by rules that prioritize hygiene over charm. Trading coupons clipped from newspapers at the register was a weekly ritual in the 1970s that turned grocery shopping into a careful, strategic exercise. Every Sunday, families spread the newspaper across the kitchen table and spent the morning cutting out tiny rectangles promising 10 cents off canned corn or 15 cents off laundry soap. Mothers organized them in envelopes sorted by aisle and carried them to the store like ammunition for a battle against the total on the receipt. The cashier took each coupon by hand, examined it, and subtracted the amount before moving to the next. Sometimes a coupon had expired by a day, and a quiet negotiation followed at the register. Kids helped by sorting or handing coupons over, feeling like important members of the shopping team. The process added minutes to every checkout, but nobody minded because those savings added up over weeks and months. Today, digital coupons load automatically onto loyalty cards, and the art of clipping has nearly vanished. But the satisfaction of watching a total drop one coupon at a time was something no app has managed to recreate. Children riding on the outside of shopping carts in parking lots was one of those small thrills that made the end of a grocery trip feel like an adventure in the 1970s. Kids climbed onto the front of the cart, gripped the metal frame, and rode it like a chariot as parents pushed across the asphalt toward the car. Some hung off the sides, others stood on the lower bar and leaned backward, and a few balanced on the back rail while the cart picked up speed on a downhill slope. Parents laughed or called out warnings nobody took seriously. The parking lot felt like an extension of the store, a place where rules relaxed and the fun part of the errand kicked in. Nobody worried about cars backing out, uneven pavement, or the possibility of a wheel catching and sending the cart into a spin. It was simply how families moved groceries from the door to the trunk. Today, stores post warning signs, lots are busier, and the idea of a child hanging off a rolling cart near moving vehicles sounds like a scene from a safety training video. But for the kids who rode those carts, the parking lot was the best part of the whole trip. Unrefrigerated eggs sold on open shelves were a perfectly normal sight in many 1970s grocery stores, especially smaller markets where refrigeration was limited and traditions ran deeper than regulations. Eggs sat in plain cardboard cartons on wooden shelves alongside bread and pantry items. Nobody questioned it because eggs had been stored this way for generations before cold chain standards changed expectations. Families checked for cracks by opening the carton and pressing each egg with a fingertip, then carried them home without rushing to refrigerate them. The eggs came from local farms or regional distributors who delivered the same morning, so freshness was rarely a concern. Kids were often sent to grab a carton, and the idea of eggs needing constant refrigeration would have seemed strange to most shoppers. The system ran on short supply chains and fast turnover rather than temperature control. Today, strict regulations require eggs to be refrigerated from the moment they leave the farm until they reach the consumer. The unrefrigerated egg shelf has quietly disappeared, a shift most people never noticed. Paying with personal checks for everyday groceries was one of the most trusted forms of payment in the 1970s, a time when cash was king, but a checkbook came in close second. Shoppers pulled out their checkbook at the register, wrote the store name across the top, filled in the total, signed the bottom, and tore the check free with a rip as familiar as the register itself. Cashiers accepted them without hesitation, sometimes glancing at a license, but often just recognizing the customer and waving it through. There were no electronic verification systems, no fraud alerts, and no machines reading account numbers. The process depended on the assumption that the person in front of you was honest, and the check would clear when the bank processed it days later. Kids watched their parents write checks with quiet admiration, as if signing your name was an act of authority. Today, personal checks have nearly vanished from grocery stores, replaced by debit cards and digital wallets that process payments in seconds. The trust that backed every handwritten check has been replaced by technology, and the ritual has faded into memory. There was a time when ketchup came in colors you would never believe. Green Heinz Easy Squirt hit shelves in the early 2000s and turned every kid's meal into a wild art project. The company wanted to make eating fun again. Bright purple, blue, and green sauces that squirted out of rocket-shaped bottles. Parents bought them by the dozen, and kids painted their French fries and hot dogs like edible canvases. The ketchup splattered across plates and lunch tables, creating masterpieces no art class could ever allow. Children squealed with laughter, while parents wondered how they would ever clean it off. For a brief, chaotic moment, dinner felt like finger painting with food, but the colors came at a cost. Those neon hues were powered by synthetic dyes later linked to behavioral issues and health risks in children. When regulations tightened around artificial food colorings, Heinz quietly pulled the plug. The bottles vanished, leaving behind only memories of bright green burgers and blue spaghetti nights. It was a strange experiment in marketing, one that proved just how far people would go for a dash of novelty at the dinner table. Still, anyone who grew up with Easy Squirt remembers it fondly, because nothing tasted quite like ketchup that looked like slime. Mercury-tipped thermometers for cooking were once the gold standard of precision. Every 1950s kitchen had one. The sleek silver line inside was mesmerizing. It measured everything from candy to roast temperatures, ensuring no recipe failed. Parents marveled at the metallic shine, and kids watched the silver bead race up the tube as if it were alive. No one realized that inside that innocent glimmer was one of the most poisonous substances known to man. In homes across America, small spills turned into invisible clouds of vapor that lingered for hours, even days. But few knew that inside that little glass tube was one of the most toxic substances on Earth. Mercury, if released, could evaporate and poison the air, damaging nerves and organs. Accidents happened more often than you might think. One slip, one crack, and the shiny silver would roll across the counter like liquid metal, fascinating but deadly. Children played with it, adults brushed it off, and homes unknowingly filled with toxic vapor. Eventually, scientists proved what had long been suspected. Even tiny amounts could cause serious harm. The thermometer was replaced by safer tools, but its legacy lingered in the memories of those who grew up watching that silver line dance up and down with the heat. Dry egg noodles in cellophane bags were the unsung hero of the pantry. You could get a whole bag for less than $1, and they could turn into just about anything. They boiled fast, held sauce well, and didn't need anything but a little margarine and salt to be considered dinner. If you had canned soup, they went in. If you had leftover meat, they soaked it up. They were soft, simple, and endlessly forgiving. You didn't read recipes, you cooked by feel, by habit, by hunger, and somehow those plain old noodles came out just right. They were the background singer in 100 family dinners. You could stretch them over multiple nights, or serve them all at once when company came by. Sometimes you buttered them with pepper and called it done. Other times you baked them into casseroles that fed a crowd. They were bland, yes, but also blank, ready for anything. No one praised the noodles, but no one left the table hungry. In the 1970s, this was your food safety net, cheap, filling, and flexible. Dry egg noodles were not a luxury, but they were a lifeline. Off-brand cereal in a bag was not cool, but it was affordable. No cartoon mascots, no box, no toy surprise, just a giant plastic sack of crunchy shapes that looked almost, but not quite, like the name brand. Fruity Circles instead of Fruit Loops, Corn Crunch instead of Corn Pops, Marshmallow Magic instead of Lucky Charms, and every flavor was a little off. You poured it into a bowl with powdered milk and called it breakfast. It got soggy fast. It stuck to your teeth. But you still ate 2 bowls and called it a good morning. Moms bought it because it lasted a week and cost less than a movie ticket. You ate it because it was sweet, kind of. It came in huge bags that barely fit in the pantry. You clipped it shut with a clothespin and prayed for freshness. The marshmallows crumbled, the flakes broke, but it fed the whole house and nobody dared waste it. In the 1970s, off-brand cereal was not shameful. It was smart. And if you were lucky, it even came in chocolate. Economy bacon ends, and pieces were not pretty, but they were still bacon. You did not get neat strips. You got chunks, scraps, and the fatty leftovers that stores could not sell any other way. But they were smoky, salty, and cheap. You cooked them slow to melt the fat, then saved the grease for later. They popped and sizzled and filled the kitchen with the smell of something special. You chopped them into beans, stirred them into scrambled eggs, or sprinkled them over a potato to make it feel like more. Sometimes they were mostly fat. Sometimes you got a good piece. But every bite counted. You knew exactly what to do with them, even if no recipe ever called for them. They made Sunday breakfast feel a little more like a celebration. You could stretch a single handful across 3 meals if you played it right. Even the drippings were sacred. You saved every drop in an old coffee can. They crisped up in a cast iron pan better than anything else. They weren't made for photo spreads. They were made for survival. Every greasy splatter on the stove was proof that you had something hot on the table. They were greasy and irregular and absolutely necessary. In a time when full strips cost too much, bacon ends were how you kept the flavor without the price. You did not care what it looked like. You cared what it did. Economy bacon ends were not about presentation. They were about making breakfast feel like a win. Canned meats preserved in nitrate salts looked like pure perfection. The color was bright pink, the flavor smoky, and the shelf life impressive. Housewives of the 1950s trusted them completely, serving slices of corned beef, deviled ham, and luncheon loaf without a second thought. It seemed like progress in a can, modern science keeping dinner safe and pretty. But what scientists would later discover about nitrates changed everything. When heated, these salts created nitrosamines, compounds linked to cancer and heart disease. That beautiful pink hue came at a dangerous cost. Even after the first warnings, it took years for consumers to believe that something so familiar could be deadly. People argued it was overblown, calling it just another scare. But soon, the facts became impossible to ignore. Those rosy slices were proof that sometimes color itself can lie. Doctors began warning families that the same food they fed their children could be silently poisoning them. By the time regulations caught up, generations had already grown up on nitrate-packed meat. It was a harsh lesson. Beauty in food can be deadly if you do not ask what makes it shine. What had once been the color of convenience turned into the warning color of caution. There was a time when everyone carried Certs mints in their pockets, little silver rolls promising 2 mints in 1. What made them special was the ingredient called retsin, a shiny green fleck that was advertised as a miracle compound for fresh breath. It was supposed to neutralize odors better than anything else on the market. People believed in it like magic, tiny specks of freshness that could erase the smell of coffee or a nervous lunch before a date. It was small but mighty, a sign that you cared about how you presented yourself to the world. Even the way the foil unwrapped had a familiar sound, like the opening note of confidence itself. For decades, Certs were part of American life, sold at gas stations, kept in car consoles, shared before job interviews or first dates. But when the Food and Drug Administration re-examined retsin, it found that the blend of copper gluconate and hydrogenated oil was not as safe or effective as claimed. The ruling forced the end of production, and one of America's simplest pleasures disappeared overnight. Today, the word Certs barely rings a bell, but for many, that minty crunch lives on in memory. It was never just about breath. It was about confidence, a tiny piece of everyday ritual that quietly vanished from the grocery aisle. Prepackaged luncheon meats were a post-war convenience that fit neatly into America's new rhythm. Busy days, quick lunches, no waste. Sliced, sealed, and ready to eat, these meats were the modern worker's dream. They filled sandwiches, lunchboxes, and picnic baskets across the nation. What no one realized was that heating them could trigger a dangerous reaction. The nitrates used to preserve their bright pink color produced nitrosamines, chemical compounds linked to cancer. Commercials showed happy families eating these sandwiches in spotless kitchens, while factories quietly churned out meats laced with preservatives no one could pronounce. It was the dawn of the convenience age, when speed and shelf life mattered more than nutrition. And like so many mid-century innovations, it took years before anyone asked what we were actually putting in our bodies. For years, people fried or broiled their sandwiches, unknowingly creating toxins right on their stovetops. Once scientists uncovered the truth, the industry was forced to reformulate, and entire brands vanished overnight. Luncheon meat never quite recovered its innocence. What was once a symbol of post-war efficiency became a reminder that convenience can carry a hidden cost. Canned tomato paste was not something you ate on its own, but it was in everything. You added a spoonful to soup, to sauce, to anything that needed depth on a budget. It was thick, dark, and so concentrated it stained your fingertips. One little can could stretch a meal for 6. You learned to scrape every last bit from the corners with a spoon. It was the base of spaghetti night, chili, casseroles, even homemade ketchup. When fresh tomatoes were too expensive, tomato paste stepped in without complaint. You mixed it with a bit of sugar to cut the bitterness. Sometimes you watered it down and pretended it was marinara. You knew it was a shortcut, but it never felt like cheating. A can of tomato paste gave dinner a backbone, even when the ingredients were bare. It lived in the back of the cupboard, waiting quietly for its turn. No one ever praised it, but nothing tasted right without it. In the 1970s, that tiny can held more than just flavor. It held possibility. Tomato paste was how you made cheap food taste like you tried. Day-old bread was a hidden treasure hunt, if you knew where to look. Your mom had a favorite shop. It was not a bakery. It was the day-old bread store. Shelves of discounted loaves, bent buns, and broken bagels lined up like misfit toys. You grabbed what you could: white bread, wheat bread, hamburger rolls with one smashed side. You had to check for mold, sure, but you also found surprises: honey wheat, raisin swirl, hot dog buns in winter. The smell was amazing. The prices were even better. You could get 5 loaves for the cost of 1. At home, you froze most of it, ate the rest fast, toasted it, buttered it, grilled it. If it was dry, you made it into stuffing. If it was too far gone, it became breadcrumbs. Nothing was wasted. The bread store was not fancy, but it kept your lunchbox full. And in the 1970s, full was all that mattered. Cottage cheese with rennet from calf stomach was once a wholesome staple that carried a darker story. Back in the 1950s, no one questioned where their food came from or what went into it. The process sounded simple enough: curdle milk, strain it, and add rennet to thicken the texture. But rennet wasn't just an ingredient. It came from the inner lining of a young calf's stomach, an enzyme extracted during slaughter. To most consumers, it was invisible, an unseen part of the dairy world. For decades, people spooned cottage cheese onto fruit, salads, and toast without realizing the cost behind its creamy texture. When animal rights movements gained traction in the 1970s, rennet production came under fire. It wasn't just the ethics, it was also the contamination risks. Using animal tissue carried the danger of bacteria and disease, especially before stricter processing standards existed. Eventually, scientists developed microbial and plant-based alternatives, and the old method faded quietly into history. Modern cottage cheese tastes the same, but it no longer carries that hidden story of sacrifice. For anyone who remembers the real thing, there's a bittersweet truth in knowing that the innocent foods of the past were often anything but. Ecto-Cooler. Hi-C was pure childhood magic poured into a box. Inspired by the Ghostbusters craze of the 80s, it glowed with a radioactive green that no fruit on earth had ever seen. It tasted like tangerine mixed with nostalgia and a hint of Saturday morning cartoons. Every kid in America wanted it in their lunchbox, and every parent knew exactly what that neon color meant: artificial dyes and plenty of sugar. It stained your tongue, your clothes, and sometimes even the kitchen counter, but no one cared. Kids sipped it like it was a secret potion, their own piece of Ghostbusters magic in liquid form. Years later, when regulations began restricting synthetic food colorings linked to hyperactivity and health concerns, the drink quietly disappeared. But it left behind a generation of kids who still swear it tasted better than anything since. For many, it was not just juice. It was a piece of their childhood, a reminder of how fun could come in the strangest colors. Even now, when someone finds an old box online or a commemorative re-release, it feels like opening a time capsule from a brighter, weirder world where even your drink looked like slime. Canned corned beef hash was salty, soft, and a little strange, but it fed you well. You cracked the lid, heard the suction break, and slid out a solid block of meat and potatoes. It looked like dog food and smelled like breakfast, and somehow it worked. You'd fry it in a skillet until it crisped on the edges and serve it with eggs, if you had eggs. If not, it stood on its own, greasy and rich and completely satisfying. There was no guessing what was in it. You just trusted that it was meat and starch and enough to hold you till dinner. You flipped it carefully so it didn't fall apart. Sometimes it stuck to the pan and you scraped it up anyway. It hissed in the skillet and filled the house with the kind of smell that said, "There's food on the stove." Leftovers went into sandwiches, folded into omelets, or straight into a bowl with ketchup. It was versatile because it had to be, and filling because it needed to be. You might not have liked how it looked, but you never argued with how it made you feel. Some people added onions or ketchup, others just let it sizzle. It tasted better than it looked. And on mornings when the cupboard was close to empty, corned beef hash reminded you that a can opener and a hot pan could still mean a good meal. In the 1970s, it was one of the cheapest ways to feel like you were eating something hearty, and it stuck with you. Government cheese was not just food, it was survival. It came in a giant, nondescript cardboard box, stamped like it was military surplus. Inside was a solid orange brick that could survive a nuclear blast. You could slice it, melt it, fry it, and it would still taste like school lunch and desperation. It never quite melted right. It stuck to pans, clumped in sandwiches, and turned casseroles into rubber. But when you had nothing else, it was gold. It made grilled cheese, it made macaroni edible, and it lasted forever in the fridge. Every poor kid in the 1970s remembers peeling back that thin paper and trying to cut a straight slice. You never got it right. It was always crooked, but that cheese kept you full, and that mattered more than anything. This was not grocery store cheese. This was a government-issued food safety net. It was part of a national aid program, and for many families, it was the difference between dinner and no dinner. It showed up uninvited, unbranded, and unforgettable. And when it was gone, you missed it, even if you pretended not to. These days, people pay top dollar for vintage processed cheese. Back then, it came free, and you still felt the cost. Economy pancake mix came in a cardboard box and gave you more than just breakfast. It was pancakes, waffles, biscuits, even dumplings if you knew how to stretch it. You just added water, sometimes milk if you had it, and mixed until the lumps mostly disappeared. The batter was thin, the pancakes were uneven, but they were warm and they were real. You poured syrup if you had it, jelly if you didn't, and ate them hot off the griddle or cold out of the fridge. They stuck to your ribs and gave you a reason to sit down at the table. Some days it was the only hot thing you ate. You learned to flip them just right, even with a bent spatula and an uneven burner. Some came out burnt, others undercooked, but you ate them all. They filled your plate and quieted your stomach, and that was what mattered. On Sundays, you made extra and saved them in the fridge like treasure. You might roll them up with butter and sugar, or just fold and eat them like a taco. It didn't matter what you called them. If it came from that box, it was breakfast. They were never fancy, but they filled the room with that unmistakable smell that made everything feel okay for a minute. In the 1970s, a box of pancake mix was more than a shortcut. It was a way to turn nothing into something. Economy pancake mix didn't just save breakfast, it saved mornings. Saccharine-sweetened soft drinks were the original promise of guilt-free pleasure. The 1950s called them miracle sodas, offering sweetness without sugar, calories, or consequence. Housewives stocked their fridges with shiny cans of Diet Cola, proud to serve something modern and figure-friendly. It seemed like a revolution, proof that science could outsmart nature. But by the late 1960s, lab tests told a different story. Rats given high doses of saccharin developed bladder cancer, and public trust shattered overnight. The reaction was immediate. Panicked consumers poured out bottles, and news anchors warned of poison in your pop. It became the first true food scare of the modern age, and every can of soda turned into a question of faith. People learned that even sweetness, when manufactured, could carry a sting. Though later research softened the panic, the damage was done. The first wave of diet drinks disappeared, leaving behind fear and confusion. People realized that artificial could mean dangerous, and zero-calorie might come with a hidden cost. Saccharine eventually returned under tight regulation, but it never regained the innocent glow it once had. What began as liberation through chemistry ended as a cautionary tale of too much faith in innovation. Surge soda was more than a drink. It was a cultural explosion. Released in the 1990s as a direct rival to Mountain Dew, it promised high energy, loud flavor, and total chaos in a can. Teenagers swore by it. Advertisements showed skateboarders, gamers, and thrill-seekers cracking open cans of electric green liquid and living like every day was the X Games. Kids chugged it before school, hoping to stay awake through class, while parents called it liquid lightning. Surge wasn't just a soda, it was an attitude, a lifestyle captured in caffeine and sugar. For some, it was the first taste of rebellion in a can. The sugar and caffeine content was off the charts, and schools quickly started banning it from vending machines after reports of hyperactivity and caffeine crashes. Parents complained, health experts warned, and by the early 2000s, Surge had fizzled out. Years later, fans campaigned to bring it back, and Coca-Cola gave them a short revival. But it was never quite the same. The original Surge felt like freedom, a little reckless, a little dangerous, and a lot of fun. It was the taste of youth with no limits, bottled in neon green and sealed with a rush of pure nostalgia. Glass baby bottles with lead paint designs were once a symbol of love and care. Parents in the 1950s adored them, decorated with cheerful ducks, rabbits, and pastel-colored animals. They were gifts for baby showers, proudly displayed in kitchen cabinets, tiny keepsakes of innocence. It was the height of the post-war baby boom, and the market was flooded with products that blended charm with modern design. Mothers trusted anything that looked sanitary and cute, assuming regulators had already done the worrying for them. But in truth, safety testing barely existed. Style mattered more than science. The paint used for decoration contained lead, a neurotoxin that accumulates in growing children and causes irreversible brain damage. No one imagined those smiling cartoon faces could poison their babies. For years, infants drank warm milk from bottles that looked wholesome but were dangerously contaminated. By the time regulators banned lead paint, the damage had already reached countless households. Modern parents might shudder at the thought, but those pastel bottles still turn up in antique stores, a haunting reminder that even the cutest products can hide something cruel. Beauty, it turns out, should never come before safety. Bouillon cubes were tiny blocks of magic that turned water into soup. You dropped one into a pot, stirred, and suddenly had broth. It was salty, concentrated, and packed with more flavor than you expected. You used it to stretch a can of soup, to season rice, or to make gravy when there was no meat. It lived in the back of the spice cabinet, usually wrapped in foil and a little bit dusty. You never used just one. You always added a second for good measure. It was your secret weapon when there was nothing but starch and hope in the kitchen. A cube in hot water meant something warm to sip, something to pour over instant potatoes, something that felt like more than it was. It gave canned vegetables more life. It made casseroles taste like they simmered all day. You crumbled it with your fingers when the knife drawer was already a mess. It was small enough to forget, but big enough to save dinner. You could buy a dozen cubes for less than $1, and they kept for years. It was comfort concentrated into a foil wrapper. No one talked about it, but everyone used it. Bouillon was not glamorous, but it knew its place and served it well. Bouillon was not a meal, but it made a meal feel like it had a soul. In the 1970s, it was how you gave dinner a backbone, one cube at a time. Canned Vienna sausages were soft, salty, and kind of weird, but they worked. You popped the lid and pulled out a row of pale, jelly-covered mini hot dogs packed tight in mystery water. They smelled like a meat factory and looked like baby food for adults. But you ate them cold with crackers or fried them in a pan and called it breakfast. They were cheap, portable, and weirdly satisfying. Each sausage was the size of your finger and had the consistency of room-temperature butter. You could not slice them without squishing them, but you did anyway, because they were meat, and meat was meat, especially when money was tight. You found them in discount stores, food pantries, and packed in your lunchbox when there was nothing else. They did not require refrigeration, which made them a pantry MVP, and no matter how questionable they looked, you were always glad they were there. They came in pop-top cans with paper labels that peeled off in the heat, and no matter how many times you gagged at the first bite, you always finished the can. They lasted forever in the cupboard. They showed up during hurricanes, blackout dinners, and those long weeks before payday. Canned Vienna sausages were not loved, but they were there. And when you had nothing else, that was enough. Aerosol cheese in steel cans was the kind of futuristic food that only the 1950s could have dreamed up. It was creamy, convenient, and somehow scientific. All the things that modern America was obsessed with at the time. Housewives marveled at how it could be sprayed directly onto crackers, celery sticks, or even straight into the mouth of a giggling child. It felt like progress you could taste. No knife, no cleanup, no effort. The secret behind the spray was pressure from chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, the same chemicals used in aerosol hairspray and refrigeration. They made the cheese foam perfectly, airy and light, and gave it that signature hiss when you pressed the nozzle. Nobody thought twice about it until scientists in the 1970s revealed that CFCs were eating away at the ozone layer, literally tearing a hole in the atmosphere. What had once been the pride of kitchen technology suddenly became an environmental villain. The cheese itself wasn't the problem. It was what made it spray that turned it into a global issue. Companies scrambled to replace the formula, switching to safer propellants, but the reputation stuck. The phrase "cheese in a can" went from novelty to punchline. For those who lived through its rise, it will always taste like nostalgia and a little bit of guilt. Few things smell as comforting as butter-flavored popcorn fresh from the microwave. But behind that warm, golden aroma was a secret chemical called diacetyl. In the early 2000s, factory workers who inhaled the buttery fumes began developing severe lung conditions later called popcorn lung. The discovery shocked the public. People started looking at their microwaves differently, realizing that even a bag of popcorn could hold a hidden danger. Families who once filled their homes with that smell of movie night joy now hesitated, torn between comfort and caution. Something so innocent, something made for movie nights and family gatherings, could actually hurt the people who made it. The lawsuits came fast, and major brands were forced to abandon diacetyl. The new formulas never quite smelled the same. Yet even now, the old scent still lives in memory, rich, smooth, and dangerously nostalgic. It reminds us that comfort sometimes comes with a cost, and that the sweetest smells can carry stories we were never meant to breathe in. Raw milk was once the pride of the American farm, bottled straight from the source and sold in glass jars. People swore it tasted better, richer, creamier, and somehow more real. In the 1950s, it was still common to see it on grocery shelves, untouched by modern processing. But beneath the nostalgia was danger. Without pasteurization, raw milk carried bacteria that caused tuberculosis, salmonella, and other deadly diseases. Rural families, especially in dairy states, considered pasteurization unnecessary city talk. They trusted their cows, their neighbors, and the land itself. Unfortunately, Nature is not as kind as nostalgia remembers. It hides danger even in the things we love most. Families believed they were drinking nature's perfect food, not knowing that it sometimes carried the very thing that made them sick. Eventually, stricter food laws swept across the country, forcing dairies to heat-treat every drop before it hit the store. Raw milk became illegal in most states, a symbol of both freedom lost and safety gained. To some, it was government overreach. To others, it was salvation. Either way, the days of milk straight from the cow were gone for good. Plain yellow mustard was the flavor that kept on giving. It cost almost nothing, lasted forever, and made even the driest sandwich feel like it had something going for it. You slathered it on white bread with lunch meat or just a slice of cheese. Sometimes just mustard and bread was the whole sandwich. It was sharp, tangy, and completely unmistakable. It made hot dogs feel complete, perked up meatloaf, and gave leftovers a second chance. The jar or squeeze bottle sat in the fridge door like an old friend, always there, always useful. You never needed much, just a little bit to cut through the bland. It lit up potato salad, deviled eggs, and even the crust of a grilled cheese. You never ran out completely. There was always some hiding in the back. You could stretch it through summer barbecues and winter sandwiches alike. Even when you were out of almost everything, you usually had mustard. It stained your fingers, your clothes, and sometimes your plastic plates, but you forgave it. Its tang made you feel like you were eating something bold, even when the rest was basic. And no one ever judged you for leaning on it, because they did too. It might not have been fancy, but mustard pulled more weight in a 1970s kitchen than people gave it credit for. It was cheap, bright, and honest. And sometimes, that was exactly what dinner needed. If any of these forgotten grocery store memories brought back a feeling you thought was gone, share your story in the comments. Tap like to keep the nostalgia alive, and subscribe so you never miss another trip into the world we left behind.